Ex-wife told me our son wasn't mine after 12 years and took me to court for full custody. Turns out she faked the paternity test so she could get money for her new man's business. This is a bit of an emergency, so I'll get right into it. So I, 40 male, had been married to my soon-to-be ex-wife Megan, 38 female, for almost 12 years. We have a 14-year-old son together, Johnny, as well, or at least I believed he was my son for all these years anyway. Megan and I had met at work and we had only been dating for 1 year when she found out that she was pregnant. I was kind of skeptical about having a baby so early on in our relationship, but she wanted to continue with the pregnancy, so I decided to support her and we moved in together after we found out about the pregnancy. When Johnny was born, it did not even occur to me to get a paternity test because Megan and I were in love with each other, and by then I was more than sure that Johnny was my son. I felt very connected to him and he even resembled me because both of us had dark hair and eyes, so I literally had no reason to be suspicious of anything. However, a couple of months ago, I found out that he's actually not my biological son and Megan had been playing me for a fool all along. About 3 months ago, she came clean to me that she had been having an affair with her high school sweetheart Nathan, 38 male, for the past couple of months, and even in the beginning of our relationship, she had had a bit of a fling with him while we were together and she had never told me about it. Because after that she got pregnant, one of the major reasons she and Nathan had to part ways after high school was because he was not very serious about his life and had chosen not to go to college. Back then, he had still been living with his parents and was jumping from one job to another every couple of months. She figured that she needed stability in her life, which is why she had chosen to be with me because I was very career driven, and she said that if she decided to stay with me, she would be betting on the right horse. But now she had realized that money wasn't everything and she was in love with Nathan, so she wanted to build a life with him. Besides, he had had enough time to change his ways and now he was a business owner himself, so she really didn't have to worry about money anymore. Back when she was coming clean to me, she told me that she had had a paternity test conducted and knew that Johnny was not my son right from the beginning but had chosen to keep her mouth shut about it because I seemed to be very happy to be a father and she did not want to ruin our relationship by talking about her past. She also made Nathan promise never to speak of this affair that they had ever again because she did not want to risk our relationship, and for the sake of her happiness, he had stayed away. However, they had reconnected at a high school reunion almost 6 months before she finally told me the truth, and they had rekindled their relationship once more because he was well settled and he was still in love with her, and she had realized that she was still in love with him as well, so she had to leave. It was a horrible time for me because I had been with this woman for so long. I had built a life with her, and yet I was getting screwed over like it meant nothing to her. Anyway, after she told me the truth, she left the house with all her things, but Johnny continued to stay with me because he did not want to go with her. She hadn't even consulted with me before telling him the truth, and he already knew everything before I had even come home from work. So both of us ended up having to console each other while we cried since our lives had been turned upside down. I knew that no matter what happened with the divorce, I was going to make sure that we had shared custody of Johnny because regardless of his biological parentage, he was my son through and through. I had raised him, and nobody could take that away from me, not Nathan and not even Megan. I spoke to my lawyer and filed for a divorce within hours of finding out the truth, and the terms of my divorce petition were pretty simple and fair. I was going to keep everything that we had, and she had better not hope for an alimony because she had been a stay-at-home mom for the past 14 years since she had quit her job after Johnny was born, and in spite of all of my support, she had cheated on me. She had already been using me for money for all the years that we had been together. I was not going to allow that to happen any longer. Of course, she was not in agreement with that and contested the terms of the divorce and demanded alimony as well as a huge settlement amount. I was ready to fight for that, I didn't mind, but she made things much worse by filing for full custody 3 weeks ago because apparently she and Nathan were planning on relocating to another city so they could open up a branch of his business there as well, and they wanted to take Johnny with them. I would be given visitation rights, but she demanded full custody since things have finally worked out so she could play happy family with Nathan now, just because it was convenient for her. There was no way that I was going to allow that to happen, and since we could not sort this out in mediation, this matter ended up going to family court. I was pretty confident that this would be a cakewalk for me, but she and Nathan started lying through their teeth about what kind of person I was, and I had to work really hard to prove them wrong, which is what has been complicating everything. Even though Johnny himself has said that he would like to stay here with me since he has grown up here, they are doing everything in their power to make it seem like Johnny is misguided and I'm the one manipulating him, and they think that I'm too much of a workaholic to be able to take care of him on my own and he would be better off living with his mother. There's also the fact that I'm not actually a biological parent to him, which is why everything is taking twice the time to be resolved. Ever since the divorce proceedings started and Megan moved out, We had come to an informal agreement about how we were going to split our time with Johnny. So far we had an arrangement where he would spend the first 4 days of the week with Nathan and Megan and would come back to me for the weekend. I thought that this was the arrangement that we would stick to even after the divorce, but they made everything far more complicated than it needed to be by deciding to relocate to another city and filing for full custody out of the blue. So we have been locked in a custody battle for the past couple of weeks. But when we were in family court the other day, Johnny said something that sent everyone into a frenzy. This was the first time that he had been actively involved in the court proceedings, and at one point he said that so far he had wanted to stay here with me and he was still going to stick to that, but not just because his life was based here, but also because he had overheard Megan and Nathan speaking on the phone to their lawyer the night before, and he had overheard them discussing how they were going to portray me as the bad guy and had come up with a bunch of lies that he started mentioning, which were far worse than the ones they had come up with earlier. Before this, they had only been claiming that I was too much of a workaholic and did not have enough time for Johnny, that I would bring the office home with me, and that most of the time that I was home, I would just stay locked up in my room and would always be busy with work conferences even on the weekends. They had also claimed that I hardly ever cared about how Johnny was doing in school and hadn't attended a single parent-teacher conference since he was born, and delegated all of that to my wife because I thought it was boring and never took an interest in his life. These things were easy to disprove. But apparently Johnny had heard that they were going to take it up a notch and they were going to really make it seem like I was mistreating him by claiming that I would beat him up and scream at him for the slightest of mistakes. But apparently Johnny was too afraid to talk about that in court in front of me, and then maybe they would be able to get protective custody of him for the time being and eventually be able to sway him against me, which would make their job easier. So he wanted to stay ahead of them and clarify for himself that he had never been mistreated by me, and if anything, it was Megan and Nathan who were mistreating him by dragging him into this messy battle for his custody and using him like a pawn just to get back at me for my divorce petition, which would leave Megan with absolutely nothing. Even though my petition was fair since she had never earned anything on her own and had even had the audacity to cheat on me in spite of being heavily reliant on me, she thought that she deserved the alimony and the settlement that she was demanding and was planning on using Johnny's custody as leverage against me so we could come to a settlement in the divorce. And on the phone, he had heard her saying that once they had the money from the divorce, she would invest in Nathan's business and take it to new heights, and they had been practically raving with joy while discussing this. So volume had probably been the last thing on their minds. Unfortunately, they had forgotten to account for the fact that at the time, Johnny was staying with them and hadn't yet gone back to me, so they had been pretty loud and he had been standing right outside the door and had overheard everything. After Johnny exposed Megan and Nathan, nobody knew what to do, and so the meeting had to be adjourned because our lawyers got a bit too loud and we ended up having to leave early. I was pretty pleased because after Johnny had spoken up, I had turned to look at Megan and she literally had her head in her hands and was holding on to her hair with such force that I thought she was going to tear it out, which just meant that all of this was true and she was screwed. I was happy with how the situation had turned out, and instead of going back home with Megan, Johnny decided to walk up to me and we started to go home together. But Megan was furious, so she stopped us right as we were about to get into our car, grabbed Johnny by the arm, and started shaking him by demanding an explanation as to why he would do such a thing in court and ruin his chances of getting to live with her and Nathan. When I saw her shaking him, I lost my temper and I went up to her, stood in between them, and pushed her back so that she wouldn't be able to lay a finger on him. Luckily, my lawyer got all of that on camera and we will definitely be using that in our next session. But anyway, I told her to back off and said that it was her own fault for being a disgusting human being, and I was glad that Johnny had taken a stand for me because he was not a spineless, spoiled, greedy monster like her. I was already pretty pissed off by the way that she was treating Johnny, especially after what I had found out in court. I was in no mood to let this carry on, but then Nathan came to her rescue and started yelling at both of us about how she had done so much for our family and now we couldn't even let her have a real shot at happiness with him. I was not even interested in speaking to that guy, so I just rolled my eyes and started getting back into the car again. But then Megan continued to hang on to Johnny's arm and said that she was not going to allow him to come back home with me because I was the one brainwashing him against his own mother and she was not going to allow this to happen. She told me that so far she had only been fighting for full custody so she could take Johnny with her and Nathan when they moved away, but now she was going to make sure that I didn't even get visitation rights. These were bold words from somebody who had just been exposed as a liar and who had been planning to lie in court so that she could get her grubby little hands on money that she did not deserve. Anyway, I told her to unhand Johnny or I would call the cops, and she said that she was his mother and she had the right to dictate where he would go. Even Johnny kept trying to free himself, but she was holding on to him very tightly and kept insisting that she would not let him go home with me. After one point, things got a bit heated, and Johnny is pretty stocky and built even though he's just 14. Megan, on the other hand, is petite and not very strong, So Johnny did the only thing that he could and pushed her really hard so he could free himself, get into the car, and shut the door. But after she had been shoved, she started screaming at the top of her lungs about how I was encouraging her son to attack her and she was not going to let this slide. I thought that was an unfair thing to say because he had not attacked her, he had just tried to free himself. In the process, she might have been shoved a little. She would have fallen, but Nathan was right there to catch her, so no harm done, right? Well, apparently not, because she and Nathan kept standing in front of our car and said that she was going to make sure that I lost custody of him because if I was encouraging him to be violent towards others just because things were not going along my terms, then I was definitely not fit to be a parent. It was not until I honked for so long that the horn ran out that they finally moved out of the way and allowed us to get back home. It has been a couple of days since then, and I'm still wondering if it was the right thing for me not to reprimand Johnny for pushing his mother. He seems blissfully unaware, but I'm in a dilemma right now because that day he had definitely shoved Megan really hard, and he's very strong, so I don't want him repeating this kind of behavior with anybody else. But under those circumstances, I feel like he was justified in doing what he did. Anyway, I'm just confused about whether Megan had a point or not because Johnny has kind of had problems with violence in the past. So, Ida for not telling my son off for shoving his mother away from him? Update 1. Hey, so a couple of you asked me why I said that Johnny has had issues with violence in the past, so that's because a couple of months ago, he was having problems with bullying in school and he hadn't told us about it. But one day we just received a phone call from the principal's office saying that Johnny had gotten into a fight and he had been injured, but the guy that he had punched in the face was even more badly injured. Apparently, that guy had been bullying Johnny for several weeks and he had ignored it initially, but then the guy started taking it too far and started cursing at our family, and Johnny didn't like that. He told the other guy to cut it out a couple of times, but when he still didn't and even tried to vandalize his locker with curse words, he just snapped and punched the guy. So there was a whole fight in the hallway. Obviously, I told Johnny that violence was never the answer to anything because I didn't want him getting into fights and roughing it up, but I was kind of proud of him for standing up for himself. I guess Johnny has never actually been violent unless the situation calls for it, and I think that's a good thing. Even in this situation with his mother, he was only trying to free himself. He wasn't actually trying to hurt anybody. So Megan misread the situation and is trying to use that against us, but I'm not going to doubt myself. It has been a week since the incident and tomorrow we have to meet again. First, we're going to meet with our lawyers so we can come to a settlement for the divorce, and then we are meeting in court for Johnny's custody. After the revelation during our session, I highly doubt that they stand a chance, so tomorrow might be the day that we can finally shut this chapter and come to a conclusion about what to do. Regardless, my lawyer and I have put together all the evidence that I can scrape together that I'm actually a good father, and we're looking forward to winning this thing. And more importantly, it's Johnny's words that will count the most, and he has made it very clear that he does not want to go live with his mom, and it's not just because he wants to live here and doesn't want to relocate, but because she is just a straight up terrible person, and so is Nathan, and they will never be able to raise him well. And we definitely don't need another person like them. I was talking to Johnny a couple of hours ago, and he told me that he was really nervous because this will be the first time that he sees his mother after he had pushed her off of himself, and he knew that she was very upset about it. He confessed to me that he was trying really hard not to care about what she thinks, but ultimately she is his biological mother and we have spent so many years together as a family that it's hard to come to terms with the truth now. He told me that he was really afraid of what would happen if by any fluke he ended up getting handed over to Megan and Nathan, but I reassured him that it was not going to happen. I would go to any court in the world to make sure that it didn't happen so he could be with me because he was my son. Nobody cares about some stupid paternity test. If I say he's my son, then he's my son. That seems to make him feel slightly better, but I can tell that the whole situation has been taking its toll on him. I don't even know how I'm going to deal with the situation if ultimately I do end up with custody of him. How do we recover from that? Because eventually his mother is going to leave the city and move away with Nathan. I'm pretty sure that after everything that has happened, she won't be willing to see Johnny again if she doesn't get custody of him. She's just that kind of person, and I don't want him to lose his relationship with his mother because I don't want him to resent me in the future. Anyway, we are leaving, and maybe tomorrow might not be the final day of this case, but for my sake and Johnny's sake, we are hoping that it really is. Update 2. Hi, so something very weird happened just now. It's almost 4 o'clock in the morning now, and I was asleep, but then almost an hour ago, someone rang the doorbell, and when I went to open it, I saw there was nobody outside but just a brown envelope left at the door. I even went through the security footage, but whoever left it outside was dressed in all black and had a hood pulled over their head, so I couldn't figure it out. But that person was taller than 5 feet 3 inches, so it couldn't have been Megan, and they were either kind of on the chubbier side or the hoodie that they were wearing was very bulky. Either way, I don't think it was Nathan either, and these two people can be the only possible option since what was in the brown envelope is what caught me by surprise. Inside there were results of a paternity test, and surprisingly, they were positive. The results were from the same lab where we got tested a couple of months back when Megan told me that Johnny was not biologically my son, and she had shown me the results that said that Johnny and I were not a match. I had gotten the test done 3 times just to make sure that she was telling the truth, and all 3 times the results had been the same, and that's when I had finally been convinced of the truth. But the results that I received just now say that Johnny and I are actually a match, so I'm very confused right now. I don't know which results were fake and which are real. Truth be told, I found it very difficult to believe Johnny was not my son because we look so similar and I had never felt like he was not my son. So whoever sent me these test results is trying to mess with my head a day before we meet to decide on custody, or maybe there's something that I've been missing all along. Maybe Megan and Nathan pulled off paternity fraud or something. I called the laboratory just now, but obviously they did not answer because, well, they're probably not even open yet. However, the first thing I'm going to do tomorrow is go to check out the place because this is really confusing and I have no idea what to do right now. I have, however, spoken to my lawyer about this, and we're going to figure out something tomorrow. First, we just need to make sure that these results are real, so I'm going to get tested again, but this time I'm not going to tell Megan anything about it. I don't know why, but I just have a nagging feeling that I'm definitely going to get some answers tomorrow if I confront her with these results. Update 3, hey everyone, so today was a really long day. First, I headed to the laboratory with Johnny and my lawyer to ask about the results that I had received just last night, but before I could ask anybody about it, this guy who seemed to be in charge took us aside and told us that it was him. He had slipped me the envelope last night, but he hadn't actually expected me to come by. He explained to us that the first time that we got tested, Megan and Nathan had spoken to him already after they had done some digging and found out which laboratory the court worked with, and they had had an arrangement that he would change the results and show it as negative so she would be able to claim that Johnny was not my son and tried to take him away with her. Apparently, she had basically assumed that once I found out that Johnny was not my biological son, I would give up on trying to be his father and leave them alone. However, when that did not happen after I found out the results of the test for the first time and I went back for 2 more tests, she decided to tell this guy to help her out and fake the results twice more. All of this was done behind our backs, and she had promised him that eventually she would make him a partner in the business once she got the money out of our settlement, and he had been looking forward to that, which is why he had helped her out 2 more times and had the results falsified the results of the paternity test all 3 times. I was dumbstruck when I found out about this because I had literally never even thought that she would be capable of doing something like this. Anyway, he had had a change of heart recently because he had kept in touch with Megan all throughout, and he had heard what happened at family court last time that we met since she had to tell him that these things were taking longer than she had expected and they wouldn't be able to start their business for another couple of months, so he would have to wait. He had decided that he could no longer go with her then because she was clearly very immoral and unethical, and so he decided to slip me that document last night. He apologized to me for all the trouble that he had caused and practically begged me not to involve him in any of this because he really wanted to remain anonymous, and I was kind of upset because this guy who didn't even know me had screwed me over a couple of months back just for some money, and I really wanted to turn him in. But that would just mean going extra lengths for me, and I did not have the energy to do that. Maybe if he repeats this kind of behavior, somebody else will, but until then, I'm out. Besides, I already had the documents that I needed to prove my paternity, so it didn't matter to me what happened to him. If it came down to it and I had to prove something in court, I would definitely use that as evidence and turn him in. However, for now, I had a different plan in mind. So then I headed to court, but before we could sit down for our scheduled meeting to come to a settlement for the divorce, I took Megan aside and she was quite surprised by that move. I told her that I had received this document last night and they were the real results of the paternity test, so she instantly understood that I knew about the fraud that she had committed. She tried to act innocent at first, but I told her that paternity fraud is a big deal and I was going to give her one chance to get out of this without more trouble if she agreed to my terms of the petition this time and also signed her parental rights away over Johnny. She agreed to the first part, but the second part was what she was not fine with and tried to negotiate with me, saying that she was his mother and she could not just let him go. However, I was not buying any of that, and I told her that there is no mother in the world who would do something like this to her own son. So now she could do what I asked of her or I would create a lot of trouble for her. After arguing with me for almost 10 minutes, she finally agreed, and I felt like I had won. After that, I finally managed to come to a settlement, and my lawyer and I were thrilled because she had agreed to the terms of the petition. And after that, we only had to wait for our last showdown in family court, and there also things went exactly according to plan, and she was unhappy about it, but she agreed to terminate her parental rights over Johnny and leave. That took everybody by surprise since she had been fighting tooth and nail for his custody for the last couple of weeks, and now suddenly she had given up. So that seemed a bit weird, but I didn't care. I had one Johnny. My lawyer and I finally parted ways and went to our respective homes a couple of hours ago, and in a couple of days, my lawyer will have drawn up the papers and she will finally have signed away her rights, and then it's just going to be me and my son against the world. Even though I think it's kind of been like that for the last couple of months already, but I just can't wait for all of this to be over officially and then I can finally try and move on with my life because this has all been really intense. However, as of now, Johnny is extremely happy with the situation and so am I, so we're just trying to make the most of that.